do I have some news for you? I think we all remember this chart. It's from the previous Ryzen video. And looking at this information, we see the 1800X flagship, 1700X as in the mid-tier of the high-end R7 products, the R7 1700, which is what I'm gunning for. Look at these frequencies, look at these TDPs, because these are correct. These prices are a bit too high, and Ryzen's been revealed fully. It's been announced, and it started with a bunch of rumors. For example, this is one of them. This is part of the R5 lineup. It's showing that the R5 1600X, which would be in the mid-tier category. So if you want to think of it this way, the way Intel spaces out its products is with the Core i5, Core i3, and Core i7. AMD seems to be doing the same thing, and the Ryzen 5 holds its own pretty well against the 6850K and the 7700K. Note that the clock speed is lower, and for single-threaded applications, a higher clock speed wins out over extra cores, depending on the program. So if you have an older game, it'll probably perform better, but as time progresses, more and more cores will be utilized. And you're going to hear the same old chart that's been circulating for a long time. And then you see this. Ryzen brings 8 cores for only $330. This is a picture from AMD's presentation. And after all this stuff, what's that? That's Ryzen. That's Dr. Lisa Su of AMD. And then you see this. AMD launches Ryzen. 52% higher IPC over the previous generation of AMD, which was like 4 years ago. So think of the 8320, 8350, and the 9590, the FX series processors. 52% higher IPC over those processors. Octa-core 16-thread for $329. Purchasable now. And as you can see here, the R7 1800X, 8-core, 16-thread, 3.6 base, 4 turbo, 95 watts, $499. Step down the line a little bit, R7, or Ryzen 7, depending what you want to say, R7 1700X, octa-core, 16-thread, 3.4 GHz base, 3.8 GHz turbo, 95 watt, $399. And then the CPU that I'm most excited for, and I'm assuming that you, the viewer, would be interested in this also, considering the price is lower. R7 1700, 8-core, 16-thread, 3 GHz base, 3.7 GHz turbo, $329. And note that the TDP has been confirmed to be 65 watts. Now, let me explain this for a second. I saw in the comment sections in the previous videos that it's sort of a left and right battle over the Team Red versus Team Blue. People argue that AMD has more cores, and therefore applications that utilize extra cores will benefit. That's true. People are arguing that applications that prefer to have a higher per core clock speed, in which Intel is ahead. Look at the 7700K, 4.5 GHz turbo, 4.2 GHz base, if I remember correctly. That CPU will perform better than Ryzen in scenarios in which a clock speed that is higher will benefit. So think of a game that will prefer cores 1, 2, 3 rather than cores 1 through 8. It will do better in that regard. I'm not denying it. Though the IPC for Ryzen seems to be a little bit higher, slightly higher, when they showed the benchmarks at the Ryzen reveal several months ago. And that CPU was actually the 1700X, not the 1800X. Now look at this. Higher IPC. And remember in the Zen event where they said they were going for a 40% higher IPC, or instructions per clock? So if you have a CPU at 5 GHz and then you have another CPU at 5.1, if the 5 gigahertz one has a slightly higher IPC than the 5.1 gigahertz IPC, they can even out. The IPC, instructions per clock, determines the performance at every clock speed. And then you just look at this. So in the 8-core market, we have the 6900K $1,050 CPU versus the 1800X flagship. In multi-threaded applications, it wins by about 9%. In single-threaded, they're about on par. For content creators out there, video editing will prefer extra cores over a higher clock speed. Higher clock speed does benefit, but having more cores overall is better, as it allows the workload to be balanced out, or to be more efficiently processed. And then we go down here to the 1700X. As you can see, we have the 1700X in the middle. We have the 6900K. Still loses out. And then we have the 6800K. Keep in mind that this is the multi-threaded workload. This allows all the cores in their respective threads to work. So of course the 6800K, which is 6-core 12-thread, will be below due to only having 6/12, whereas Ryzen has 8/16. And then this. The CPUs are launching March 2nd. Quite a bit cheaper than Intel's processor lineup. Pre-orders are available February 22nd, which is today. And then you can see the benchmarks from earlier. And then look at these prices. The 1700 is $329, confirmed from this. The 1700X is $400, and the 1800X is $499. Note that the X denotes XFR, which is extended frequency range, which allows your chip to dynamically increase voltage and clock speed depending on cooling and the workload you're doing. So if you're playing Fallout 3, your CPU probably won't be turboed up to the max clock speed. Whereas if you're, I don't know, transcoding in Cinebench or using a handbrake to convert a file, it'll turbo up. And if you have an X label CPU, you can use the extended frequency range to go past the rated turbo. Note that in the presentation, Dr. Lisa Su mentioned that the 700X would go from 3.8 to 3.9 gigahertz with XFR, and the 1800X going from 4 gigahertz to 4.1 gigahertz XFR. If you watch the presentation over here, note that all of these links will be in the description as usual. But I'm curious, because I want to see independent reviewers like Last Tech Tips, Jay's 2 Cents do reviews on these chips, because keep in mind that AMD can be sandbagging this. Note that the benchmarks they showed preferred more cores, and Intel obviously has a higher clock speed. Look at the 7700K and the upcoming 7740K, i5 7640K, which will be on the X299 chipset. Those will have a really high clock speed, and the reason Intel is releasing those chips is to combat Ryzen. If Intel can have a higher clock speed, well, they have half as many cores, but if they have a higher clock speed, they're going to be preferred in the gaming area, the gaming market. Because for the most part, older games and games nowadays prefer higher clock speed. Note that as games are progressing, more and more games nowadays are using more cores, and 5 years down the road, I'm pretty sure that you'll see 8-core as the standard all across the board. You'll see Intel's i5s and i7s being octa-core. You'll see AMD probably being more than 8 cores at that point in time. AMD's always touted its many cores badge. So if I had to build a system right now, I'd probably go for the 1700 and overclock it, because I feel that having 8 cores and 16 threads will be a better buy for future games, future future content I would work on, stuff like that. I much prefer the more cores over the higher clock speed if I'm looking for stuff in the future. Note that these CPUs are all overclockable. Everything Ryzen is overclockable. So depending on the cooling, you can push it higher. So if I put it underwater, I could probably push it past 3.7 gigahertz for this R7 1700. And keep in mind, 1700 is 65 watt, 1700X is 95 watt, 1800X is 95 watt, and I'm interested in the R7 1700 because from my experience, the lower TDP, or the lower wattage of power consumption, the cooler the chip runs, and the further you can push the chip. Heat and voltage are constraints for CPU's clock speed getting increased, so I learned the hard way with my 4790K over there that it requires pretty good cooling to be overclocked. That's a pretty stupid phrase, but you'll understand it in a second. I use a T12 Evo, and it reached 70 Celsius in some games. I put it on water, and now it reaches about 60 in games. And before, in a stress test, it would reach 90 Celsius. Now it reaches about 75. Keep in mind that the better cooling you have will determine higher overclocks and better performance if you so choose to push the CPUs. And as you can see here, Intel's response is most likely going to be the 7740K, which means it's going to have a higher clock speed than the 7700K and the i5 7640K to improve upon the 7600K. So go in here, as you can see, the Ryzen's little plates there will have a Ryzen logo on them. Below the little plate is the thermal interface material that connects the CPU die to that little lid there. Lid you see, it's for heat spreading purposes. That way you mount your cooler on it and it can spread the heat better. It's also to shield the die. And then you look over here. AMD's site's been updated and pre-orders are available. Ryzen processors, you can see that the Ryzen events there. And then look at this. Look at these motherboard vendors. Yeah. I get it, AMD. ASRock, BioStar. It's a given. Gigabyte, MSI, Noctua, and Corsair for coolers. ASRock, BioStar, Gigabyte, MSI, Asus. All of them. Well, Asus isn't on here. But all of them are making boards. And there's going to be roughly 80 boards available. 80. I believe the number is 82. And then look here, cooling solutions that will have AM4 brackets. I almost said AMD4, I'm sorry. AM4 brackets. AM4 is the socket for Ryzen. So note that Intel's sockets are more of like a cross design, like a square, whereas AMD's is more like a rectangle, two above and two below, rather than to the side, spaced out in a square, more like a rectangular pattern. As you can see here, mounting points there, 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 and there. So you can see here's a, I believe that's a U14, an HU14S, and it's an H100, I think. I think so. Those will have AM4 brackets available, and then you can see AMD's other stuff, talking about esports and virtual reality and other hubbub. And as you can see, $329, $399, $499. Note that these will all be in the description. And of course, there are other outlets, so if you want to check on news reports. And then look at this. 1800X, Ryzen 7 1800X, 3.6 to 4, $499, Newegg. R7 1700X, 3.4 to 3.8, AM4, 95 watt, $399. And for some reason, the R7 1700 isn't on the isn't on Newegg right now. So if I search R7 1800X, naturally wouldn't do it. Naturally, I misspell it. That's great. Yay! I learned how to type. The 1800X here And if you search 1700X, you can find it here. And for whatever reason, the 1700, oh, it's up now. Huh. That's neat, because 5 minutes ago, it wasn't. The irony. Then again, AMD's event recently ended, so the CPUs are rolling out, the boards are rolling out, and all this stuff is available on shelf or on your doorstep, depending on how you purchase these items, on March 2nd, and pre-orders are available today. Woo! And it comes with the Wraith Spire cooler. That cooler is, well, the stock cooler also has RGB functionality. If you are so inclined to delve in RGB, and of course, links before will be there too. And then if you go over here, AMD Ryzen stock cooler. Here we go. These are the coolers. This is a 65 watt, 95 watt, and higher performance cooler. And these little rings around here are actually RGB. If you look at AMD's press event and last Tech Tips video, it is actually RGB. So, again, if you like RGB stuff, as you can see, here's Raja Kadori. There's one of the coolers right there. That little ring there lights up, and you can change colors depending on what you want. So you can have it red for AMD, you can have green for NVIDIA, you can have it yellow for Urine Stain. It doesn't really matter. Whatever you choose, and this will soon be updated, hopefully, as well as this. And I'm not going to pre-order these chips. I'm going to wait for the reviewers. So I know how tempting this all looks, how all the marketing and the hype are pushing these CPUs forward, and as excited as I am, and I know you're probably excited as well, I'm going to wait for independent reviews to come out, because AMD mostly showed multi-core benchmarks where extra cores benefit over Intel. For games, it depends on the game, and quite frankly, I want to see how far XFR goes. I want to see how far manual overclocking goes, like I did on my chip. I want to see the cooling capabilities, how hot these chips run, any other stuff like that. So 65 watt TDP here, 95 watt TDP here. I want to see the temperature differences. I want to lay the land with these chips, because I want to see which chip overclocks the highest, and so far it looks like the 1700 is the best buy. Anyway, this information is very interesting, and in roughly 2 weeks the market is going to have a big shakeup. A much needed one, I must say. And finally we'll see some big competition. And there's also rumors about Intel's, I've already mentioned it, the 7740K and the 7640K coming out. But there's also mentions of Coffee Lake coming out, which is their 8th generation chips. That's supposed to come out second half this year. Anyway, thank you for watching. This is a very interesting time, and a very nice time to be a PC gamer or enthusiast. And I really hope that this will shake up the market, light a fire under Intel, because I'm pretty sure Intel is going to have a pretty big price cut once these chips release. They're going to decrease the prices of their i5 and i7 to better compete with AMD's products. And overall, it's going to be better for the consumer. Before Ryzen, Intel could have its own little monopoly. Since Intel lacked a pretty big competition, they can charge whatever they like for a chip. That's why the Deca-core, the i7 6950X, costs $1,700, which I believe went down to about $1,550 now. They could charge whatever they want. they could sell that chip for $20 and they make no money off of it. But now, because of the competition, they're going to have to lower the prices. The reason why the 6950X costs so much is because there is absolutely no competition in that market space. If you have no competition, you can charge whatever you want because you're the sole owner of it. With this competition, note that Ryzen's octa-core, not deca-core, it's going to shift the prices down for Intel. Because Intel wants to compete. Every company wants to compete. Intel needs to decrease its prices so they can still have sales. Unless you're purely going for clock speed, in which you'd probably pick a 7700K over an R7 1700. Granted, I don't know how far these chips overclock. We'll have to see. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.